The others all said, yes, and isn't it wonderful that we have this state? Yes. And Marx and Engels came along and said, this is no democracy. This is what all these guys have been talking about for 400 years or 4,000 years. And here it is again. Now, I would suggest that there is another state function that is seldom discussed, and that is the function of the state to prevent the capitalist system from devouring itself. That's a very important thing. Consider the core contradiction that Marx pointed to: the tendency toward overproduction and market crisis, or some people call it overcapacity. An economy that's dedicated to speed-ups, wage cuts, making workers produce more and more for less and less, increasing your production and cutting back on your labor force, is always in danger of a crash. To maximize profits, wages must be kept down. But someone has to buy these goods and services. And for that, wages must be kept up. Ideally, what I want to do as a worker is pay my workers as little as possible, but have these other bosses pay their workers more so they'll have the money to buy the goods and services that my miserable, underpaid workers produce. So I maximize my profit. So wages must both be kept down and they must be kept up if you're going to have any kind of consumer market, any kind of buying power out there. The determination of whether we produce, whether the market produces for you and for your needs, has nothing to do with your needs. You understand that? If you don't understand, if you don't understand anything else about the system, but you understand that, you're really onto it. They don't produce for your needs. They produce for your demand. And your demand is your need or want or desire or whim, whatever it might be, plus money. Buying power. If you don't have any buying power and you don't have any demand, then we're not interested. When they were talking about the problem of hunger in America, they went to the food industry and said, are you going to do something about hunger in America? And one of the CEOs, I don't even know if I got that quote in here, I can just tell you from memory, he said, if we saw opportunities for profitability, we would move into that. So they make it clear. David Roderick, former CEO of U.S. Steel, he said it once, it was beautiful. It was beautiful. I mean, when I heard it, I almost, to hear your enemy speak the truth is like so, like a breath of fresh air. He said, look, Senator, U.S. Steel is not in the business of making steel. We're in the business, and then he didn't say profit. He said it more accurately. He said, we're in the business of making the highest possible profits for our stockholders. And that's what it's about. They'll make steel, they'll make widget, they'll make whoopee, they'll make whatever they have to make. The thing is to make money. And their function is not to feed you, not to make you happy, not to make you whole, not to make you educated, not to make you feel proud of yourself or feel whatever in your human capacities. Their function is to make money. And so they see you as two things: a target as a potential worker from whom they can extract surplus value, or as a customer to whom they can sell these various things, services and such. Often convincing you that you have needs so they can sell you something which you don't really have, needs you don't really have. You really need this and blah, 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 that sort of thing. Now, when the state fails to control capitalism in this consuming of its own base, it's consuming its own base. You keep laying off workers, you're laying off buyers and customers and such. When the state refuses to do any kind of regulation, when the state observes capitalists, some of them not even bothering to create goods, to market, to try to sell, to make sure they're not stuck with with big inventories, you go through all that. Why go through all that when you can just tap right into the money streams? Right where the money is, just start packaging that stuff up and parlaying it and like a big capitalist casino. We saw this one whole nation where this happened, where the capitalist state failed the capitalist system. That was Argentina. Remember about 6, 7, 8 years ago? Where the class just went in and plundered and stripped that whole economy. And the real economy, the productive capacities of it just went through the floor. And you have now workers trying to reopen factories and start them all over again. And these guys just went off. And the Argentine state, which was engorged on a very heavy diet of free market ideology, just simply faltered in its function of saving the capitalism from the capitalists. The free market ideology is anchored in the classic laissez-faire theory, which claims that everyone should pursue their own selfish interests without restraint. Do you remember when Alan Greenspan got up and made his mea culpa before the committee some months ago, where he said, I was wrong. I didn't believe that these investors would act with such a lack of restraint and not consider something other than just their most severe self-interest. He said, La La Land. This guy was head of the Federal Reserve from La La Land. But the classic theory is far worse than Greenspan. As I said, the classic theory says you should have no restraint. You should pursue your own selfish interests without restraint. Because this unbridled competition supposedly will produce maximum benefits for all, because the free market is governed by a miraculously benign, invisible hand that optimizes collective outputs. Well, greed is good, as they said in the movie. All right, there's a whole bunch of things about crash itself. I don't want to go into. You've heard a lot of that, I bet. This disaster, this free market corporate capitalism, is by its nature a disaster waiting to happen. Its essence is the transformation of living nature and natural resources into mountains of commodities, and the transformation of these commodities into heaps of dead capital. When left entirely to its own devices, capitalism foists its diseconomies, its toxicity, its criminality upon the general public and upon the natural environment, and it begins to devour itself. That is, it begins to create the conditions for its own collapse. And the disaster was unfolding before our very eyes. I mean, there were people who were saying, this is not a healthy situation. Things aren't going that well. But no mention of it was made in the mainstream press, or very little, because Wall Street was doing so well over the last 8 years. The Dow Jones was up at record highs, but the real economy was something else. In the last 8 years, that gift we got from George W. Bush, in the last 8 years, 6 million more people in our country sank below the poverty level. A poverty level that itself is too unrealistically low. It really needs major revamping. It was set up without any consideration for the need to own a car. But in most parts of this country, if you don't have a car, you can't buy food, you can't get a job, you can't get to a job. It's a necessity. And the working poor devote an enormous amount of their earnings to just maintaining this very expensive, terrible ecological disaster known as automobile. Anyway,